In this video, I will introduce the product rule and the quotient rule and go over examples of both. First off, the product rule. It looks a lot worse than it is. When we take the derivative of an f times a g, you take the derivative of one, leave the other alone, and then vice versa. Leave the f alone, take the derivative of the g. Another way to write it that might be less confusing, though maybe not. Here I've got the derivative of f, leave the g alone, leave the f alone, take the derivative of the g. Now this can be extended to if you had three functions. If you had f times g times h. Yuck. But take this one step at a time. We have the derivative of the first, leave the other two alone. Take the derivative of the middle one, the first and the last one alone. And then take the derivative of the last function and leave the first two alone. Let me rewrite that again because I've got lots of color on there. And again, if I've got to extend it to four functions, the same idea. Take the derivative of one at a time so you would have four different terms. First example, we have y equals x squared plus 2 times 3x cubed minus 5x. We could multiply this together, but we're not because then I can't do the product rule. So the derivative, I take the derivative of the first one, which was 2x, leave the second one alone. Then I leave the first one alone and take the derivative of the second one. And no need to multiply that all out. That would defeat the purpose. We could have multiplied it all out in the first place. This is what I'm looking for. How about this example? I've got 2x to the fifth times 4x squared plus 1. Again, I will take the derivative of the first one and leave the second expression alone, and then vice versa. This one I couldn't multiply out. The other two, I could have multiplied them out and taken the derivative that way, but this one I must use the product rule. Take the derivative of the first one, leave the sign alone, then leave the x cubed alone and take the derivative of the sign. Here we have the square root of x cubed times cosine. Keep in mind the square root of x cubed is the same thing as x to the 3/2. So first I take the derivative of x to the 3/2, so I get 3/2 x to the 1/2, leave the cosine alone. Then I have x to the 3/2, I take the derivative of the cosine getting a negative sign. I don't like the way that looks. Bring the negative out in front of the x to the 3/2. Here's one where we've got three functions. We've got an x, sine x, and a cosine x. First I deal with the x, then I deal with the sine in the middle, and then I deal with the cosine at the end. Rewriting this a little bit because I don't like cosine, sine times sine, I don't like the negative in there. I can take the time to clean it up for one step. Now let's look at the quotient rule. We have f over g, we take the bottom, multiply it by the derivative of the top, minus the top times the derivative of the bottom, all over the bottom squared. If you just have a constant on top, we have something called the reciprocal rule. So let's do some quotient rule practice. We have 1 plus 2x over 3 minus 4x. Derivative, bottom times the derivative of the top, minus the top times the derivative of the bottom, all over the bottom squared. We could multiply this out and simplify, but this is what I'm looking for right now to make sure I know you know how to do the quotient rule. The rest is all algebra. How about this one? We've got 3t minus 2 over t plus 1. Well, why did I switch to t? Well, why not? T is just as good a variable as x, and we get kind of locked in that f of x and y box. So I have the bottom times the derivative of the top minus the top times the derivative of the bottom, all over the bottom squared. Here we have one where there's a constant on top. So it's going to be negative the derivative of the bottom over the bottom squared. So that gives me a negative. The 7 just gets dragged along because it's a constant. The derivative of the bottom is 3t squared minus 3, and the bottom squared is t cubed minus 3t plus 1 quantity squared. Now here's one that's a little bit oogier. I have a quotient, but I also have a product on the top. Take it one step at a time. Be neat, be careful. Start with just doing the quotient rule and ignoring the fact that that's a product for now. I have the bottom, I have x squared plus 3 times the derivative of the top. I'll do that in the next step. Minus the top times the derivative of the bottom. That's pretty straightforward. All over the bottom squared. Now I can take the derivative of x sine x. So then doing the derivative of x sine x, I have sine x plus x cosine x. So we've done several problems with the product rule, the quotient rule, the reciprocal rule, and where they're mixed up. And my next exciting video will be the chain rule.